In module 1 here, we're going to work with two tools, just the line tool and the arc tool. The line tool looks like a pencil, and if you're just navigating for the first time, you're typically with the arrow cursor, which is sort of the fundamental look around and click on different objects in the space. And for basic navigation, you have the use of the orbit tool, the pan tool, and the zoom tool, which are easiest to use on a mouse. So I really highly recommend that you always use the mouse when using SketchUp. Your field of view to sort of show the first module area, and go ahead and click on the line tool. You can also press L on your keyboard for a shortcut. And what happens now is we're going to begin the first of pretty much every operation in SketchUp that has a two-step process. The first is to click your first point of the object anywhere in the space, and it's going to automatically create on the ground plane, which is the plane on which you see the red and the green axis. So that's a really arbitrary decision. You can also sort of start at an origin on an existing endpoint. But once you create that first node, make sure you click the mouse button fully and don't hold the mouse button. And you'll actually enter the intermediate zone between the first and second step, in which you've created a sticky point for the first part of the line, if you think of it like a reference point. And from there, you have the option of placing the next node anywhere on the field of the ground plane to complete the line step. And so you can go ahead and just do that. And you'll notice that immediately it forms a solidified line, and you're now sort of treated that last step as the first step of the next line. And you could theoretically keep going from here and do as many different lines as you'd like. And you can notice that if you just sort of go wildly at this, different things will start to happen. But you might also notice that suddenly things are not lining up so well. And if you just orbit around, you'll realize that it's not too hard to accidentally begin building in the Z direction, in the blue direction in this case. And so the first thing we're going to do, if you would sort of go all the way back to the beginning, is look at the fundamental concept of axes using lines. Let's create another arbitrary first point. Let's also notice now that as you're hovering around to create that second point, sometimes the line snaps to red, sometimes it snaps to green, sometimes it snaps to blue. And these, in fact, are just lining up parallel to the coordinate axes of the plane, of the SketchUp world. So you can verify this, especially in the blue axis, by zooming up to a sort of lower eye elevation. You can see that it really is going up and matching the blue axis straight up into the sky. And so it's important to know that SketchUp can intuitively pre-stick to these locations, or to these directions, which will allow you to know that you're definitely making your vector or your line in that direction. There's key strokes you can make to lock onto these, which is very, very useful for engineers as you're looking at creating horizontal or vertical planes and grids. You simply use the arrow keys on your keyboard. Right will snap to the red axis, left will snap to the green axis, and up or down will snap to the blue axis. And you can click it twice to sort of get back into completely free mode. So let's just go through an exercise of making a handful of red and green lines all the way around the space. And I'm simply going back and forth from the left and right arrow keys in between. And then you can also go up into the vertical plane by locking to the blue, and then switch back into the red and green. So now you're simply creating nodes up above however far you were. So this is something you should get familiar with pretty quickly, as most of the lines and shapes you'll be making tend to be orthogonal to the coordinate axes. So now let's go back to the very beginning and illustrate another very important concept, which is that ideally you're not even clicking a second time at all with your mouse. Rather, you're inputting an exact dimension. And the way to do that is to first create your arbitrary reference point. You can decide on a specific direction you want to go. In this case, let's go in the red direction away from the avatar character. So that means you're going to hit the right arrow on your keyboard. And then you'll notice that as you're hovering around, now you have confined the degrees of freedom to just the red axis. But you can still make a binary choice of whether the second point is going to be to the left or to the right of the way you're looking at. And that's really the only decision you need to make at this point. So let's say we wanted to go away from the character. you simply have to leave the cursor anywhere on this binary half of the entire world. Then you're going to let go of your mouse. And I want to direct your attention to the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, in which you can see length, and then in a sort of interesting dimension there, 8'6¼ inch, and not even exact. So that's simply in real time showing you updating the dimension of what that line will be. In fact, when you're in this intermediate zone between the first and second step, you can switch over to the keyboard and type in exactly how much you want. So let's say we want it 5 feet. You would type in 5, and then the foot symbol, and then click enter. And you see what happens is that it solidifies a line in the direction you were moving towards at exactly 5 feet. And we aligned it to the red axis, so it remains on the red axis. Now we're again in that sort of chain step, so you can create another one. Let's switch to the green axis. Let's go back towards the character. And then again, just simply leave the cursor on the side you want to be in. Switch to the keyboard and type 5 feet, enter. And we can keep going like this. We can go back towards the character one more time in the red axis, typing in 5 foot, enter. Now let's switch up to the top, going up into the sky. We can also, of course, go down below the ground. But let's leave the cursor up in the sky and then type in again 5 foot, enter. And in this process, you can quickly create complex shapes and be very confident about where you are in space. And one of the first things you should get familiar with is to work comfortably in the 3-coordinate system of SketchUp. Let's quickly switch over to creating a shape, because so far we have only been creating lines. But you'll notice that if you were to create a square or any rectangle and complete the shape, it also creates a field. And if we switch back into the arrow cursor, we can actually select 5 different pieces in this shape. We can select each of the individual lines, and you'll see that they highlight as blue. You can hold Command or Control, and you can select many of them at once. But you can also select the surface, and it looks a little bit polka dotty. And in fact, this is a piece you can manipulate as well. Now, you can delete objects, and that's simply using the delete key on your keyboard. So you notice that if you selected the surface and deleted it, it would go away, but the 4 lines would remain. Whereas if you deleted a line on any side, it would delete that line, but it would also delete the shape. And of course, the property here is that a surface can only exist if it's completely bounded by lines. So that's an important thing to sort of get familiar with now. Let's create a more complex object. And first, let's use the arc tool. So the shortcut there is A. You can also click it on your toolbar. And it's going to actually be a 3-step tool. You're going to create a line, which is going to be like the major axis of your semi-arc or semicircle. And then you're going to create the minor axis. And so if I were to start arbitrarily, and in this case, you can't use the up, down, left, right, but you can still wait until the cursor intuitively snaps onto the axis. So just sort of move in that direction. So here we're going in the green axis away from the origin point. And we're going to type in 5 feet again. We're in that middle step, 5 foot, enter. And then it's locked on to 2 parts of the arc. And now you're just going to create something like the radius in either direction. And you see here that since we created the first part in the green axis, we can now align in the red axis quite easily for the next step. And so if we're going to go towards the origin point again and type in 2.5 feet, and by geometry, this creates an exact semicircle. Now you'll notice that this circle doesn't look very circular at all. It actually looks like a many-sided line. SketchUp cannot create real curves. It can only approximate curves with a many-sided polygon or many-sided line. So that's an important thing to know, that certain shapes that are circular in nature will not be exact. But nonetheless, from here we can create another arc. And you can notice that it has a tangent feature if you'd like to use that. In this case, let's make an exact semicircle again, facing the other direction. I'm going to go through almost exactly the same step. And from here, let's go back to the line tool. You notice that you can lock on to existing endpoints, which will show up as green if you hover over them. And from here, let's create a 5-foot line towards the origin in the green axis. And then let's complete the shape we've been making here, which is a heart. And you'll notice that even if the shape is complex, as long as you maintain the same plane and that you create a fully bounded shape, it will turn into a surface.